The factory worker's wrench stopped in the middle of a turn when he heard the pilot's voice echo across the Buffalo assembly line. "I'm not flying that death trap." It was March 1942, and yet another test pilot had just refused to fly the Bell P-39 Airacobra. It was the fifth refusal in the same week. The airplane stood shining under the hangar lights, its fresh paint still drying on the unique mid-engine fuselage. Everything about it appeared modern and forward-thinking, from its tricycle landing gear to the large 37mm cannon mounted in the nose. But the men expected to fly it into battle had given it another nickname. They called it the flying coffin. What made this refusal especially painful was the situation. America urgently needed fighter aircraft. The Buffalo factories were working non-stop, 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week, trying to produce enough planes to change the war against Germany and Japan. Yet here stood a brand new fighter that no one wanted to fly. British pilots had tested it and cancelled their purchase. The French never received theirs before their country collapsed. American pilots took one look at its performance and requested to fly anything else. Even the company's own test pilots were beginning to doubt it. The issue was not immediately visible from the outside. The P-39 looked sleek and modern, and it carried more firepower than almost any other fighter at the time. That 37mm cannon could tear through armor like it was paper. The engineering idea was clever. By moving the Allison engine behind the pilot, Bell's engineers achieved perfect weight balance and opened up room in the nose for that powerful cannon. A long drive shaft ran under the cockpit, connecting the rear engine to the front propeller through a complex system of gears and bearings. But the real-world results were disastrous. The drive shaft caused strong vibrations throughout the entire aircraft, making precise flying extremely difficult. Pilots said it felt like sitting on top of a washing machine running at full speed. Even worse, because the engine was behind the pilot, any failure sent hot metal and flames toward the cockpit. In normal fighters, engine failures happened in front, where pilots could see the problem coming. In the P-39, they happened behind, often giving no warning until smoke and fire were already reaching your back. Before we go on, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you already know about the air war on the Eastern Front. Let me know in the comments. If you had heard about the P-39's amazing performance in Soviet hands, and if you like these deep WWII's aviation stories, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. These videos take real research to get the facts right, and knowing you're here makes it worth it. The most serious flaw showed itself when pilots tried to climb. The Allison V-1710 engine performed well at low altitude, but lost power badly above 12,000 feet. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. German Messerschmitt Bf-109S flew easily at 25,000 feet. Japanese Zeros could operate even higher. A P-39 pilot trying to climb to stop enemy bombers would be struggling for altitude, while enemy fighters attacked from above with every advantage in speed and positioning. Colonel Bruce Holloway, reviewing the P-39 for combat use in early 1942, wrote a harsh report that spread through the Army Air Forces. The aircraft is fundamentally unsuited for the high-altitude interception role for which it was intended. Its ceiling is inadequate. Its climb rate is poor above 10,000 feet, FT, and its handling at higher altitude was outright dangerous. I cannot, in good conscience, recommend this aircraft for frontline service against the Luftwaffe. Under normal conditions, that statement should have ended the program. In any logical military procurement system, a fighter that could not perform its intended mission would be cancelled, and the factory would shift to producing something more effective. But wartime production did not allow for logic or patience. The United States was still recovering from Pearl Harbor. New factories were being built, new workers were being trained, and assembly lines were only beginning to run at full speed. Cancelling the P-39 would have meant shutting down an entire industrial operation and starting again from zero. That kind of delay would cost months, maybe even years. So the assembly lines kept moving. Workers in Buffalo continued fastening airframes, fitting engines, and mounting weapons onto a fighter, the Americans and British refused to fly. By spring of 1942, hundreds of P-39s were rolling out of the factory with no pilots and no assignments. They were parked in open storage fields across the United States, long rows of unwanted fighters quietly collecting dust while the war continued without them. Then came a surprising answer. The Soviet Union, locked in a desperate battle against the German invasion, needed aircraft, any aircraft. Joseph Stalin had made it clear through diplomatic channels that he needed enormous numbers of fighters, bombers and tanks, and he needed them immediately. The United States, eager to support its ally and keep Germany occupied on the Eastern Front, began sending equipment under the Lend-Lease program. Among those supplies were hundreds of P-39 Airacobras that no one else wanted. American officials privately saw this as a convenient solution. Send the problem airplanes overseas, keep the better fighters for U.S. forces, and hope the Russians could make something of them. If the P-39s failed in Soviet service as they had in American tests, at least it would not be American pilots paying the price. The journey to Russia was long and dangerous. The aircraft were loaded onto ships in U.S. ports, sailed across submarine-infested oceans to Persian Gulf docks, then disassembled and hauled overland through Iran into southern Russia. The trip took months. Some planes were damaged or destroyed on the way. Some were lost to German U-boats. But by late 1942, the first P-39s finally reached Soviet airfields, where they were greeted very differently than in America. Soviet pilots evaluated the Airacobra with no bias or expectations. They did not care about its poor high-altitude performance because their battles were not fought at high altitude. The air war on the Eastern Front was brutal, close quarters, and fought mostly below 10,000 feet. German Stuka bombers attacked Soviet positions at low level. Soviet aircraft strafed German tank columns from treetop height. The chaotic, close-range dogfights that defined the Eastern Front took place in dense air where the P-39's Allison engine performed at its best. The first Soviet squadrons to receive the Airacobra treated it as a trial. Pilots who had previously flown the LAG-3, a light wooden fighter that lacked speed and firepower, were stunned. The P-39's 37mm cannon could destroy a German bomber with one accurate hit. Its strong metal frame could survive damage that would have shattered the fragile LAG-3. And in the low-altitude battles the Soviets fought, the P-39 was actually faster, stronger, and more agile than many German fighters. Senior Lieutenant Grigory Reshkalov was among the first Soviet pilots to fly combat missions in the Airacobra. His early report, written in October 1942, revealed a very different way Soviet pilots judged aircraft. The American machine is heavy but strong. It does not climb well, but it dives like a falling stone. The cannon is excellent. Today, I destroyed a Junkers Ju-88 with 3 shells. The tail section separated from the aircraft completely. This machine rewards boldness and punishes hesitation. That mindset, boldness rewarded and hesitation punished, became the heart of Soviet Airacobra tactics. Pilots learned to take advantage of the P-39's strengths while avoiding situations where its weaknesses could be exploited. They struck quickly from a favorable position, fired the powerful cannon at close range, and pulled away before the enemy could respond. In the hands of pilots who truly understood it, the P-39 changed from a flying coffin into a deadly hunter. The pilot who perfected the Airacobra was Alexander Ivanovich Pokryshkin, a name that would later become legendary in Soviet air history. Born in 1913 in Novosibirsk, Pokryshkin had begun the war flying outdated I-16 fighters, struggling to survive against superior German aircraft. When he switched to the P-39 in early 1943, he instantly saw what the aircraft could do. Pokryshkin developed a complete tactical doctrine designed around the Airacobra's unique qualities. He called it the formula for air combat, a disciplined strategy that focused on altitude advantage, controlled speed, and accurate shooting. His squadron would patrol at medium altitude, around 15,000 feet, watching for German aircraft below. When they saw a target, they would dive, gaining high speed. Close to very short range, fire the 37mm cannon in a quick burst, and then climb sharply away, using the extra momentum before German fighters could react. The results were devastating. Pokryshkin's personal victory count rose quickly, 5 kills, then 10, then 20. By the time the Battle of Kursk began in July 1943, he was the Soviet Union's top air ace, and his regiment, flying American-built Airacobras, had become one of the most effective fighter units in the Red Air Force. German pilots began recognizing his radio call sign and warning one another whenever he took off. Achtung, Pokryshkin in the air became a common message on German radio channels. The Battle of Kursk demonstrated the P-39's true value on a huge scale. Germany launched its last major offensive on the Eastern Front, sending massive numbers of tanks and aircraft to break Soviet lines. The Luftwaffe expected to win air superiority quickly. Instead, they met Soviet fighter regiments flying P-39s, commanded by pilots who had spent months refining their tactics to perfection. During the first week of the battle, Pokryshkin's regiment claimed more than 100 German aircraft destroyed. His personal total for July 1943 reached 23 confirmed kills. The German attack, which depended on air dominance to support its troops on the ground, was constantly disrupted by Soviet P-39s that would appear suddenly, attack with deadly accuracy, and disappear before German fighters could respond. The P-39's heavy cannon was especially effective against the slow, vulnerable German Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, which were often destroyed in just a few shots. By mid-1943, reports of the P-39's unexpected success on the Eastern Front were reaching American intelligence analysts. 1943. At first, these reports were met with disbelief. The same aircraft that American pilots had dismissed as unfit for combat was now being described as one of the most effective fighters in Soviet service. Some American analysts assumed the claims were simply Soviet propaganda meant to make the United States feel better about sending outdated equipment. But the evidence was too strong to ignore. Soviet Lend-Lease requests specifically started asking for more P-39s, not P-51 Mustangs, not P-47 Thunderbolts, but more of the supposedly inferior Airacobras. By 1944, thousands of P-39s were being delivered to the USSR, and Soviet aces were building victory records that matched the best American and British pilots. Pokryshkin finished the war with 59 confirmed kills, all in American-built fighters, mostly the P-39. The reason for this dramatic difference came down to environment and doctrine. American fighter tactics in 1942 focused on high-altitude escort and interception. The P-39 had been intended for that role, and it failed. Soviet air strategy, however, centered on low-altitude support and local air superiority. In that mission profile, the P-39 was nearly ideal. The same features that made it poor at one style of warfare made it excellent at another. Meanwhile, Bell aircraft engineers in the United States were learning from the P-39's mixed reputation. The plane's weaknesses revealed major design issues, but its successes proved that some of its forward-thinking concepts were sound. The tricycle landing gear, which many had criticized early on, turned out to be far better than the old taildragger style. It improved visibility during takeoff and landing, reduced ground accidents, and made training easier. Bell began developing an improved version called the P-63 King Cobra. It kept the P-39's general layout, but added a stronger engine, better aerodynamics, and changes based on Soviet combat reports. The P-63 would never serve in large numbers with U.S. forces. But like the P-39, it found great success with Soviet pilots. More importantly, the P-39's lessons shaped the next generation of American fighters. Tricycle landing gear became standard on nearly all later U.S. aircraft. The focus on pilot visibility, pioneered in the P-39's car door-style cockpit, became a core design requirement. The idea of concentrating heavy, slow-firing weapons in the nose, proven effective by the P-39's 37mm cannon, influenced armament decisions for years. When Lockheed's legendary engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson designed America's first operational jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star, in 1943, the similarities were obvious. Both aircraft used tricycle landing gear for easier control. Both emphasized clear pilot visibility and simple maintenance. Both placed the engine behind the pilot, though in the P-80, this was due to jet engine requirements rather than cannon placement. The P-80 represented everything the P-39 had attempted to be. It took the smart ideas, corrected the flaws, and carried American aviation into the jet era. The connection between the criticized P-39 and the successful P-80 was no accident. It was the result of evolution, shaped by hard-earned lessons, success and failure alike. The P-39's failure at high altitude forced American engineers to understand how vital engine supercharging and consistent performance across all altitudes truly were. Its success in Soviet service showed that there is no single universal definition of what makes a fighter aircraft good. Mission goals, combat conditions, and tactical doctrine all shape whether a design will succeed or fail. Alexander Pokryshkin, the Soviet ace who mastered the P-39, ended the war with 59 confirmed victories, making him the second highest-scoring Allied fighter ace after Ivan Kozhedub's 62. He was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times, the highest honor available. In his memoirs, written after the war, he spoke at length about the Airacobra, calling it the finest aircraft he ever flew. The American machine taught me everything important about air combat. It rewarded skill and punished mistakes. It gave me the means to survive and the weapons to destroy my enemies. More than 4,700 P-39s were sent to the Soviet Union during the war, nearly half of all Airacobras ever produced. Soviet pilots flew them from Stalingrad to Berlin, achieving thousands of aerial victories against the Luftwaffe. These were the same aircraft that American and British pilots had dismissed as unsafe. The same flying coffins test pilots had refused to fly. Yet in Soviet hands, they became weapons of triumph. The production lines in Buffalo finally stopped in August 1944 after building 9,584 P-39s of various versions. The factory workers who assembled them likely never knew the full story of how the aircraft performed in battle. They heard the negative opinions from American pilots, the criticism that the P-39 was a failure. They probably did not know that on the Eastern Front, those same planes were helping to turn the tide of the largest ground war in history. By 1950, the P-39 had nearly disappeared from military use. Jet aircraft had become dominant, making propeller-driven fighters obsolete, except in small, special roles. Most Airacobras were scrapped, their metal recycled for other purposes. A few survived in museums, preserved as examples of wartime engineering. But the aircraft's legacy lived on in later American fighters, shaped by the lessons learned from both its shortcomings and its unexpected achievements. The story of the P-39 Airacobra challenges easy beliefs about technological progress and military superiority. It shows that success and failure often depend on context. The same aircraft can be both ineffective and highly successful depending on how it is used. It proves that innovation can come from unexpected places, and that the path of progress is rarely straightforward. American aircraft designers, who once mocked the P-39's unusual configuration, later adopted many of its features in jet fighter designs. Soviet pilots who received it as unwanted equipment from their American allies turned it into one of the most dangerous weapons in the skies. The contradiction shaped American aviation for decades, showing engineers that brilliance and failure can coexist inside the same design, separated only by circumstances. The engineers at Bell Aircraft, who designed the P-39 with high expectations, never intended to create an aircraft that would be rejected at home and celebrated abroad. They believed they were building a fighter that could dominate aerial combat with its powerful cannon and innovative layout. When American pilots rejected it, calling it a flying coffin, it must have felt like a crushing disappointment. Yet even the design decisions that seemed to fail ended up forming the groundwork for America's jet-age aircraft. The factory workers in Buffalo, who assembled thousands of P-39s despite knowing that their own Air Force did not want them, showed another kind of courage. They continued to produce aircraft with care and precision, even when pilots mocked the machine they were building. They kept the lines operating when logic suggested the program should be shut down entirely. Because of that commitment, when the Soviet Union urgently needed fighters, aircraft were ready to send. Today, the few P-39s that still exist sit in museums beside Mustangs, Thunderbolts and other famous World War II fighters. Their displays usually describe the Airacobra as a flawed design that unexpectedly succeeded in Soviet service. That statement is true, but it does not capture the deeper meaning of the P-39's history. The P-39 represents something more than just combat results. It represents the complicated nature of technological progress, where mistakes and disappointments teach lessons just as important as achievements. The fighter that no one wanted ended up teaching American aircraft engineers exactly what they needed to know to build the world's best fighters. Its weaknesses revealed missing knowledge. Its success in Soviet combat proved that design must match mission and environment. Its innovative features, once refined, became standard on later American jets. The flying coffin became one of the hidden foundations of U.S. air power. When the North American F-86 Sabre, the leading American fighter during the Korean War, first flew in 1947, it carried clear design heritage from the P-39. The safe and stable tricycle landing gear, the strong focus on pilot visibility and cockpit layout, the understanding that fighter design must balance speed, firepower, performance, and control. These were not abstract theories. These were lessons earned through frustration, rejection, and, on the Eastern Front, unexpected triumph. The story of the P-39 Airacobra shows that history's judgment is rarely simple. The aircraft, once labeled America's worst fighter, contributed more to the development of future American aviation than many of the designs that were praised. The flying coffin that U.S. pilots refused to fly helped Soviet aces achieve victory scores among the highest in the war. The design that seemed destined for cancellation ended up shaping the next generation of air combat. Sometimes the machines we dismiss end up teaching us more than the ones we admire. And sometimes the worst design becomes the cornerstone on which the best is built.